Hello, everyone. This is Father Michael Tischel,
And this is Strati Papageorgiou.
and we are
An imperfect
podcast.
No. I try to always mess it up a little bit so that
That's good.
it stays fresh.
Yeah.
Cue music.
So we're going to switch it up a little bit today. I'm going to lead us off, and the question is, how do you know that there's truth, that truth exists, that something is true? What does it mean that something's true? Mm-hmm. And what's the proof? So truth and proof. What is the proof? How can we actually know that something is true?
It's kind of nice this time that you started it.
Thank you.
Because I don't know, I feel really relieved.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird.
It's like you just
it's
took a deep breath.
I don't have to be on the edge of my seat to make sure this goes smoothly. You're
just in the passenger seat.
Right.
And I'm driving.
Sometimes it's nice
blindfolded.
Who's blindfolded?
I am.
But yeah, that's the topic. And I think it's in an age where there is no truth. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like or everybody's truth is their own.
Well, maybe we could approach it from a different perspective. Maybe there's truth fatigue.
Truth fatigue.
There's so many. In other words, there's so many ideologies out there. There's so many kind of belief systems and philosophies and religions. It's like you just sort of give up. It's like how could any one of them possibly be true?
Yeah.
And if it is true, how could you possibly know?
Yeah.
Because each philosophy, each ideology, each religion, each system of belief comes with an entire system of practice. And so in order to know that something's true, not only do you have to sort of know about it, but you have to actually practice it. So there's no way you could possibly practice all of the different religions in order to come to any sense that this is true. Mm-hmm. So, there's this sense that that means that they're just all true, and who cares? It does, your truth is as good as my truth, and why go any deeper than that? It's just this sense of relativism and the sense of not wanting to step on each other's toes and fear of, conflict and, people pleasing.
Yeah, I mean, you hear it a lot that all paths lead to the same end. Mm-hmm. You don't hear it a lot, maybe, but I've heard it.
Yeah, we're all on the same path.
We're all
going in the same direction. It's just we choose different ways of doing it.
And maybe on a level that's true, that we are all in the human experience.
Yeah,
right?
We're united in that sense.
And but to say that every religion is the same in the sense of that every religion worships the same God at the end, in the end, that is in and of itself. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, if you look at the individual religions, without becoming fully immersed in them, let's say, just looking at the teachings of each one, I mean,
right.
You see contradictions, like one contradicts the other. Mm-hmm. You can't call fire and water the same thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, one does one thing and one does another thing. Mm-hmm. But that is so prevalent in our age.
Right.
And I don't think it started now.
Right.
I don't think it's a product of the 21st century or even of maybe the 20th century. I think it goes back a few hundred years before that. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely come to a head, and from my perspective anyway, I'm not a what do you call them? I'm not a sociologist, maybe, or anthropologist. Mm-hmm. I'm not an anthropologist, but I would say that it's become on the level of the average person, perhaps in our day, more than it ever has before. Because now more people have access to reading, and they don't just... we actually talked about this a little bit before, but in ages past, the average person, I mean, if they did read, they read their Bible, you know, and they plowed their field, and they raised their children, and they, you know, they passed on, and then their children did the same thing, and then they passed on, and people just kind of functioned in a small community of like-minded people. Now you just need to turn on you just need to log on to any website, just with Wi-Fi, you're literally connected to every single culture on the face of the planet, in one way or another, just with Wi-Fi at your Starbucks. And you can you can experience through secondhand every single culture and religion and philosophy in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
You could learn about religions that don't even exist anymore.
Right.
Learn all about their philosophy and their theology, and they were extinct 5,000 years ago.
Right. So, given all of that,
Yeah, I just threw it all on.
no, all the context and the kind of circumstances within which we find ourselves, given all of that, is there truth? And if so, how do we get to it? And I want to throw out a little sort of idea and see if it takes us anywhere. But, a lot of us, when we think about coming to any kind of knowledge of any kind of truth, whether it's scientific truth or truth of any kind, really, anything, any sort of sense of reality, of what is, of what exists, what is there, I think we think of it on different levels. There's the sort of like the level of the senses, right? Where it's like, I know that this object is sitting in front of me because I can feel it, I can see it, I can taste it, I can touch it, I can smell it, right? So my senses allow me on some level to obtain proof of something's existence, right?
Yeah.
On another level, there are intellectual truths, right? Certain ideas, logic, certain kind of sort of intangible or things that go beyond sense perception, but that are within the realm of the mind, like the concept of forgiveness, right?
Sure.
There are certain indications of forgiveness in our everyday life. I can see certain things happening when somebody is forgiving another person or is being forgiven, but ultimately forgiveness is something, as a concept, you could say, that's beyond the senses, right? It's like it's an idea, it's the expression of a, or war, war, right? Like as a reality, it happens, but then as a construct, as a way for us to conceptualize it, we call it war, right? Which is sort of beyond the sum of all of its parts. It's something beyond, or just you name it, any kind of intellectual construct.
Yeah, we can talk about war all day, but unless you've been in war.
Yeah, but it's kind of, I'm actually kind of trying to talk about the opposite. It's like being in war, like being in the trenches or something is one thing, but talking about war as a construct is actually something beyond the experience of it, because you could be in a hole in the ground somewhere shooting a gun. That doesn't mean it's war.
Yeah.
Right? So we have certain indications of war, that someone's in a hole in the ground shooting at somebody, or that there are tanks or something like that. But the concept of war is what sort of unites all of those things that we do together into this one concept, right? And the concept is beyond what you can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Mm-hmm. So all I'm trying to say is that there's an empirical way of coming to truth, right? Of like what you can see, touch, taste, smell. Then there's an intellectual way of coming to truth. It's like what you can conceive of, what you can think about, which is beyond the senses. Mm-hmm. And those are kind of the two primary ways, I think, oftentimes that we think of coming to truth. It's either your senses or it's your mind. And what I want to kind of offer to us is that there's another way of coming to truth that includes the senses at times, it includes the mind at times, but it really goes beyond both of those. And it really begs the question is there anything beyond the senses and beyond the mind? And there are some people that would say no. What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
We're just kind of, reduced to sort of these, our bodies and our minds, and everything else is just chemicals and,
Right.
Whatnot. But I think most sort of indigenous cultures, and certainly, to a really exalted extent, our own Christian kind of mystical tradition has a beautiful role for what's called the nous, right? The intellect, which is not just our rational mind, but it's this kind of like deep, intuitive faculty that goes beyond both our mind and our senses, and allows us to perceive a reality that is not perceivable by our senses and that's not perceivable by our mind.
Yeah.
And that is the only way, in an ultimate sense, that we can come to know the kind of truth that we're talking about when we're talking about God.
Right.
And if we don't know that exists, and if we only try to access truth through our minds and through our senses, then we miss out on the truth that is accessed through this deeper kind of intuitive.
And it's not necessarily that intuitive either to do that.
Right, especially in our kind of counterintuitive, because we're so saturated with what we see, what we smell, what we touch, with those kind of stimuli, and also with this kind of dispersed sense of intellectual.
Yeah, and there are many components or things that entertainment. There's a lot of things bombarding you is what I'm getting at. It's not one thing or the other. It's everything, right? The entire structure of the world now is distracting.
Right. Well, and I think that lends itself to a temptation amongst us, even us sort of religious folk, where we are tempted to discern truth based on kind of intellectual categories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there's no value in that.
Yeah,
but ultimately speaking, we're not going to come to an assurance of the truth ultimately through intellectual categories or through sense perception.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately speaking, it's going to have to go beyond the intelligence and beyond the senses. It's going to have to go beneath the intelligence and beneath the senses.
Yeah, you can read as many books as you want, and you can listen to as many podcasts.
Right.
But if you don't, I guess
obviously the only real podcast to listen to.
The only one you need to listen to is this one.
Right. That's the only one that's going to lead you to any sense of reality.
I don't know why I'm looking at the microphone like I'm
trying to convince the microphone.
That what I'm saying is true.
Well, because ultimately the microphone is an embodiment of our audience. So,
yeah.
Hi, microphone.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. Yeah, and the concept, the mysticism and the what you said before, the nous,
mm-hmm.
and sort of, to an extent is sort of lost even in the Western practices or Western theological traditions, and it's really all based on. Well, the Bible says it.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, and the Buddhist Book of the Dead says this.
Right.
So
we're sort of using an intellectual sort of approach to sacred texts.
Yeah.
And then we can just compare and contrast.
The Quran, well, it says that. So what do you mean the Bible says this? This says that. So why is that empirical evidence that your book says that?
Right.
And exactly what you're saying, where just because you believe this but you say you believe it anyway, it does not make it true.
Right. Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
And it's scary.
Why is it scary?
I think it's scary for some people. I think it's scary because what if everything I ever believed was fake, right? You know, and I've spent my whole life believing this, and then oh no, you know.
And I've invested
Yeah,
time and energy and money and I mean your
time,
profession.
yeah, time, yeah, or but not even just that, but yourself. If you you spent your energy worshiping this thing that isn't true, whether it be money. In fact, we don't even need to say about religions, but whether it be money or my musical career or my professional career of whatever.
So how do we know?
I really do love that. And I forgot why he said this, but Pontius Pilate asking Christ,
"Oh yes,
what is truth?"
Right.
I really love that because.
And then Christ was silent.
Yeah, and he was
Didn't
silent. Didn't respond.
And the theological interpretation is that he didn't respond because Pilate asked the wrong question. He shouldn't have asked what is truth. He should have asked who.
Who is truth?
Right. Yeah, so if the right question is who is truth and not what is truth, what does that say about truth? What does that say about the nature of reality? And in many ways what it says is that through Christianity, through Christianity and through Judaism that kind of preceded it, what we get is this sense about life, this sense about reality, otherwise known as a revelation about reality, which is a personal revelation. In other words, as Elder Sophroni has mentioned numerous times, our search for the absolute, our search for absolute truth, ultimately comes down to finding absolute truth in a personal absolute, right? In other words, that absolute truth is not this abstract state or condition or idea or ideal or form or whatever.
I think that will only lead to stagnation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right.
The concept that is just sort of abstract.
Right. But at the heart of the universe, at the core of everything is a living being.
There has to be. If we're living beings, how could there not be a living being that made it
Something less abstract,
right?
Less personal than us.
Yeah, and yet a person, right? Like,
well, I'm saying, how could there be something less personal than us?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, there's something very compelling to me about this notion that we all have this craving for absolute truth, right? We all have this craving for truth, but that the truth that we're craving is not the completion of an idea, or a logical sequence. Like if only I just figure out, put these two puzzle pieces, like these, if I complete this puzzle piece or this puzzle of ideas, then I'll be fulfilled. Right? It's not, fulfillment is not going to come by me figuring out reality, by me hacking reality. It's going to come by communing with the personal absolute, by me communing with the source of all being, who is a who and not a what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day where, somebody was saying how there have been oh God, nobody quote me or put in the comments, it's actually this many. But there's been 70,000 generations since recorded, anthropology has found man, because that's a whole other thing too, But, so the generations of humanity, right? And I struck me, so what, God just allowed so many generations of people without revealing himself, until the Jews, until the Israelites, until the Abraham, I guess. And what's interesting is that and I don't know a lot about this, I will admit that, I don't know the whole story from beginning to end, but of Abraham's life. But I do know that he then journeyed somewhere, actually to where the Temple Mount is today in Jerusalem, and met a man named Melchizedek, who was worshiping God on that mountain where the temple, the Jewish temple, was built, where today there's mosque. But anyway, and that guy was totally separate from Abraham. So there were people worshiping this one God, whoever he was. They weren't, there was no name. I mean, yeah, there were, later there'd be names, Yahweh and all these different, but that in this world that we're living in, there has always been a presence of the one true God.
Sure.
Even in a small way, he's always been, and you could also go to...
Well, in a big way. I mean...
Well, a big way.
Creation is a pretty big manifestation of...
yeah.
The presence
I
of
guess
God.
what I meant by little is that
Our
it might be
perception
subtle,
of-
yeah. Our
the human perception.
The human perception of him may have been subtle, but there's always been those who have worshipped him since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of humanity's, ability to... This is Adam and Eve, but since our ability to, when we were breathed into with his spirit, from that time on, somebody has always worshipped the true God, even if it was some random guy on a hilltop in what we call now Palestine. And that leads to everything we're talking about. That encounter with Melchizedek and Abraham leads to everything we're talking about. And there are many stories in the Old Testament that, although in the books they'll come after Genesis, or they'll come after Abraham and Melchizedek, but are actually older stories, apparently. Like Jonah is an older story. And so there are always people, maybe even groups of people, that worship the one true God, just without a name, I guess, without a designation. And so what we are is really just the legacy of that, that truth. And I think that to me, it is kind of an intellectual thing. And you did establish that this can't be only intellectual.
Sure.
But from an intellectual perspective, I think that's very comforting. That this isn't just a set of rules that my grandmother or my grandfather or my parents set for me because their grandparents and their whatever, they just do it. There's no reason. But that this is a lineage that goes beyond just a man. Now, he's God, right? But just a person who appeared,
right,
in
human form,
in human form in 1 AD.
Right.
Well, I don't know what year that would be called.
Right.
But this is a long line of truth.
Yeah.
And there's always been people who believed that truth.
Right.
And then that man who appeared in the man, I keep calling him a man, of course.
Sure.
That person who appeared, he revealed everything that had already been revealed.
Right.
That he was the one.
Yeah.
Being the one at the core and the center of it. That he's the one, the truth.
Yeah.
That they were all leading up to.
He's the fulfillment and the actualization of that.
Yeah.
Prophetic
expectation. Of all the line of people that worshipped the one true God. He's the one that was the one true God, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll just say it as it is. And beyond that, so we find this person that comes and he reveals that he's the one that is, the one who is, oon in Greek, which I love the word oon because it means the one who is, but on in Greek means being, a being,
right?
The being,
right.
He is the being,
the one who truly exists in and of himself.
He is,
yeah. Everybody else exists in relation to him.
Right.
He's the only one that actually exists.
And so he, and that experience is not, and that experience in him was not a okay, I will now set a list of rules that you must follow.
Right.
Do them in order, and you're good.
Right.
Right? You do this, A, B, C, and D, rest of the alphabet, go to heaven.
Right.
Congratulations. Shake hands.
Yeah.
But rather a mystical experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're getting at, is that this approach to finding truth is ultimately not a discovery or a result of our searching, but though we do search, we realize that ultimately speaking, the experience of truth is actually more like something that's given to us rather than something that we find. In other words, it was both revealed cosmically through the coming of the Messiah, through the coming of Christ, but it's also revealed mystically through our own personal, Pentecost and our own personal discovery of truth and the assurance of something as being true. The confidence that's given to us, the assurance that's given to us, is something that's a result of that personal communion, not something that's a result of our intellectual or empirical searching.
Yeah, like as we talked a little bit before, there's no measuring stick, right? Like you can't say, well, I ran the tests, and this is 100% the right one.
Well, because, ultimately, none of that can fully satisfy our craving for truth, because our craving goes beyond intellectual and empirical desire, you could say. Our desire for truth transcends, or even our desire for truth transcends the senses and our intellect. And therefore, the only thing that's going to fulfill that desire is going to have to be something that, or someone that transcends our senses and our intellect.
Yeah.
And so, I can search all I want, intellectually, historically, all those things are nice. There's nothing wrong with them. But ultimately, they're not going to fulfill my craving in the same way that the presence of the living God will do as I encounter God in my life.
Yeah.
And that presence is not something that I can conjure up through my own searching, although my searching is part of that, right?
Yeah.
But as many mystical theologians and figures have said, when they search and they, quote unquote, discover God, they realize that He was the one who was searching for them all along.
Rather that it's His will rather than their will that He even revealed Himself to them.
Exactly. So the searching...
They don't control Him.
Right.
He's His own...
Totally free.
and that's the interesting thing. Like the ancient Greeks, they would, from what I've heard or studied, they would fool the gods. They would cut out the good parts of the sacrifice.
Right.
And then cover that up and then offer it up to so-and-so God so that He could give them a good harvest or whatever they wanted. And that sort of concept that man trying to control God, that I pray to God so that I control Him so I benefit.
Right.
That's just not... not really how it works.
So the question is how do I prepare myself? Maybe, if we can't control God, if we can't figure things out, if we can't hack life, then how do I predispose myself to receive this revelation of truth? And if truth is revealed as a personal absolute, as a person, it's not a what but a who, then what's going to prepare me? Is it a seminary degree, a PhD? Is it getting better glasses or a hearing aid? What's going to prepare me to to encounter this kind of truth that's actually going to fulfill my craving for truth.
Yeah, and I, it's interesting because I think some of the people who were closest to God were people who could barely read.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I mean, they were people who were simple in
Right.
that sense.
Yep.
And they didn't have a lot of, as you might say, book learning.
Right.
But were simple in heart and were open to Him.
Yeah. Yeah. Simplicity, humility.
It's hard these days to be simple, isn't it?
It is. It is.
We know so many different things.
We think we know so many
Well,
different
we think
things.
we know so many different things.
We're aware of so many different things.
Sure.
But what do we actually know?
Yeah, well, I was referring to the concept.
Or we think we should know all these things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just mean like, we know a lot about popular culture.
Right. Yeah.
All about all the celebrities.
Yeah.
Or all about certain franchises, movie franchises or comic books or
But what do we actually
we know all about those. We think we know all about those things, or we know about all those things, or however you want to put it. And we know more than just this,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of our world is no longer, in Christian cultures of past, the world around was literally a Christian culture.
Mm-hmm.
They lived every day
Right.
with the knowledge of the New Testament, maybe
Right.
the Old Testament, depending on where we're talking about right now. I know Protestant culture has a little more emphasis on the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, they had a culture now our culture is so open
Mm-hmm.
to so many different things and so many different lore.
Mm-hmm.
So much different lore. The lore of I hate putting out franchise names, but like the Star Wars universe or the
Right.
Star Trek universe or
Right.
the Marvel universe, and I know all of and I've studied that.
Right.
I haven't, but well, I'm a fan of some of those things too. So I my world does not only on a day-to-day level revolve around scriptures and these things. I also have all these other hobbies, you may say,
Sure.
that I don't know. I don't think it's bad to have hobbies,
No.
but I do think that we are distracted by
It's the distraction, yeah.
We are distracted by a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And what's important to us, and what people today, they argue, they literally will argue, fight over superheroes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which superhero will beat the other one, and they will get on forums online and will vent.
Oh yeah.
And will spew venom at each other and terror. I mean, the internet's horrible. But or video games.
Yeah.
Oh, video games. And people who their whole life is video games.
Yeah.
We live in a different world.
Yeah, it's a lot of little lights.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, beautiful visual of like all of these different things that distract us as being like the stars, right? And Saint Porphyrios talks about this, and like all these things are the stars, and at night the stars are the brightest lights around, right? I mean, the moon.
Unless you're in a city, but yeah.
Yeah, right. That's a whole nother.
Right. No,
right?
but you're right.
Yeah,
though.
they're until the sun starts to rise.
Right. Sure.
And then at which point all of those quote like seemingly bright lights set in light of the sun.
Yeah.
And in a similar sense, the revelation or the rising of the light, right? When we experience the light, all of these other lights cease to have their draw, their appeal.
Yeah.
So it's really asking ourselves, like, how do we? It's another way of asking the same question I asked earlier. How do we come to the knowledge of the truth? How do we predispose ourselves for the revelation of the Son, the capital S Son?
Yeah. I think there's the answers are out. I see them all the time. Right?
Yeah, but what's the answer? Like, what's
the answer?
What's the answer that's actually going to work for us?
Yeah.
For you and for me.
For you and me?
Yeah. What do we need to know? What do we need to do?
Well, what they would say is you read the lives of the saints, read the scriptures, pray, fast.
Yeah.
You know,
Do the stuff that our church prescribes.
do the stuff that the church prescribes. Go to confession. That helps. But and all that's true, and none of it's wrong. But I think tackling people's interest. I look around and I see people being interested. So, I mean, even among our own people, being interested in so many other things.
Mm-hmm. Sports.
Sure, sports, music,
all good things.
fine things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like beyond our own people, let's not criticize our own people.
Yeah.
They're fine. You're fine people if you're listening. We love you. We're you. We are part of you.
We are you.
We are you. Or politics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Sure.
that's a huge one.
Yeah.
That's huge. We can't let, and this goes for all of us, we need to give some time, whatever time it is, to study our own Orthodox Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you were listening to what I was saying a few minutes ago, like this is a lot older and so much more profound than just a religion.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people say, "Well, there's a lot of religions." I hope I'm not repeating myself now, but this is just there are many truths and all that. But if you really look into it,
Yeah.
and we can all have our hobbies and our interests. But we all need to dedicate some time to learning about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that will lead, hopefully,
Yeah.
to the next level, which is, I'm no one to preach, but to pray and to attend services as much as we can. Because it's not the cool thing to do anymore. It's not.
Right.
In Greek, I just want to say, δεν είναι της μόδας.
Right.
It's not.
The fashionable.
It's not in fashion.
Right.
To do what we're talking about. It's in fashion to go to concerts. It's in fashion, and fine, go to
Right.
concerts. But I mean, go to concerts, love music of whatever kind, but also love your faith too.
Yeah.
Try to love your faith. Love. The church is the
What I hear you saying is we need to go a little bit beyond doing something because everybody else is doing it.
yeah, I guess
Just one little step beyond that.
yeah
I mean, everybody's doing this stuff, right? And we sort of get pulled along with it. And not many of the things that people are doing are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, although some things are probably less healthy than others.
yeah, absolutely.
But, I think what a lot of this comes down to, as I wrestle with this myself, and just a lot of these questions as far as what is truth and how do we actually experience it, comes down to getting to know myself as a human person and sort of allowing myself to be alone with myself for a little bit, to kind of face up to the sometimes uncomfortable, unpleasant, reality of my own reality disconnected from my external environment. And, whether that means like sitting in a room by myself for a little bit or kind of digging into my faith for a little bit, because there is a sense of solitude in that, but like doing things, solitude. I think solitude is a good way of putting it, because it's sort of like removing myself from the fray, removing myself from the mass mind to the extent that I'm able. I mean, we're always going to be affected one way or the other to a certain extent, but I don't know. I wonder if solitude has something to do with it. to kind of come to a deeper sense of who I am, of what life is all about. We were talking about this off air, that it's not just about going out in nature, but there's also a sense of immersing ourselves in worship. That there's a revelation in nature, and that we can connect to God in nature to a certain extent, but that God has, the creator of the universe has revealed himself in a very specific and clear way through the person of Jesus Christ, who then kind of instituted this way of connecting with him through his crucifixion, his resurrection, and then giving of his body and blood for us to be able to participate in that in a liturgical way as well. And so it's not only through going out in nature or being alone with God, whatever, but also through our coming together as a body and becoming the body of Christ and worshiping in that sense, that we have a very real communion with the personal absolute, who is Jesus Christ.
I think it's also good for our soul, because after everything you just said, his crucifixion, resurrection, all the things that happened after that,
Ascension, Pentecost,
then the apostles go out and preach. I said this before, I mentioned before, the culture, the civilization that was created around it, which is a civilization of healing, of spiritual uplifting, that we should participate in, whether it's iconography or chanting or just reading spiritual books.
Yeah.
All of that can help us find truth. But I think ultimately, I guess it's what you said before.
I really hope that's true, because it's really beautiful. Strati's looking at me like, what did you just say?
You lost me.
No, everything that you're saying is really beautiful. And therefore, I hope it's really true. And in the sense that... You
don't believe me?
I'm a priest and I don't believe you? Oh, my Lanta.
Oh, my Lanta. Oh, my goodness.
Well, no, I mean, I believe you, but I'm a conflicted person.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. Oh. I know, isn't that?
That's terrible.
That's terrible. I should be just totally
defrocked.
Resolved, defrocked. Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I think life is all about coming to terms with what is true and having conflicting beliefs and, coming into a deeper sense of things. And I think that's the most beautiful thing I've heard, is to be able to enter into this Christian culture, to be immersed in it, to be baptized in it, to be healed by it, to have it be this extended therapeutic bath of truth and beauty, and it's all kind of interwoven, that beauty is not separate from truth and truth is not separate from beauty.
There we go.
I just hope it's all true. At the end of the day, I hope that I turn out the way that I'm supposed to turn out. As I hope that I.
Well, it is true. It's just we hope we do it right. Maybe is what you're trying to say, or that you.
Yeah. Well, how do you know it's true? By just doing it, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Is I'm in it right now. I'm in it.
I know.
And I hope it's gonna work out okay.
What do you mean you hope it's gonna work out okay?
Well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to have like a?
You have to have some sort of faith.
Well, isn't that part of hope?
You have to have pistis. Belief.
Trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to have some.
I think I have a little bit.
This is not a therapy session. I don't do clerical therapy or whatever you call it.
Clerical therapy.
Priest therapy. Or
Clarity. You're not a clarithist?
I'm not a clarithist.
Oh, man. Anytime someone says, like, do you know this to be true? I always I'm like,
Yeah.
wait, do I know? I don't know anything. Lord have mercy. I don't know.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
It's like,
I know what you mean.
I'm not
I
saying
think-
that it's not true, and I'm not saying that I don't think it's true.
Well-
It's just that this kind of like this
You
like
know this to be true.
right, this like anvil, very like concrete, like metallic sense of like this is true.
Well, I
like,
don't know. I mean, I think that
concreteness.
the saints would be like, yeah.
But what gives them that?
Well, they have
confidence?
an experience with.
So it's experience.
Yeah.
It's
actually experiencing God, the uncreated.
But I don't know if the experience of God generates that, like, duh.
Not duh, but for the saints, they wouldn't be like, well, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, so you don't think the saints ever had
Not
doubts?
that they ever did, but I think as they become
Progressed.
as they progress
They became
in their
more-
holiness and theoses, the very word theoses, like I'm assuming that they don't have any doubt at that point. How could they? They
So
experience it
what is-
regularly, daily.
So, yeah, well, exactly. So what's the abrogation of doubt? So
Fear?
when doubt goes away,
Maybe.
when doubt goes
By
away,
the way,
what is in its place?
I feel like I'm taking
Certainty?
a test. Yeah, that's good.
Certainty without God's presence. In other words, I think there's like a level of like certainty that's actually harmful in the sense that it's sort of like this illusion of
Sure,
I'm sure that this is true
that could lead
because
to
I'm like clenching my fist and
the
saying
air.
like,
Yeah.
you know. But my sense is that the way that when doubt is turned into I prefer the word assurance rather than certainty.
Sure.
Because to me certainty
Well,
it belies more of
kinda-
a kind of like a
yeah, it's kind of how you perceive
black
it,
and
though.
white,
Maybe,
like
maybe it's just kind of how you perceive the word certainty. But
yeah.
I agree. with you.
Assurance for me is more of a heart-centered
Sure.
thing, and certainty is more of a mind-centered thing. And for me, sort of like the transcendence of doubt
Yeah.
is actually the descent of the presence of God in my life.
I mean, there's examples of John the Baptist, right? Doesn't he send
doubted.
a letter to? Yeah.
He was wondering if this is the real guy.
And didn't he hear the voice?
Yeah.
So
I don't think that the saints had certainty. I think they had assurance, and assurance is presence. Assurance is wrapped up in communion. Certainty is wrapped up in this sort of like very self-centered, self-enclosed sort of
yeah,
like I figured it all out
Yeah,
on
yeah.
my own.
right.
Assurance to me is like the Holy Spirit has touched my
Sure.
heart
But
in a gentle way, and
Yeah.
and I'm in communion with God.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean my mind has figured it all out.
No, but it does mean that you don't necessarily doubt the existence of God per se.
Well, a
At that
fool
at
has
that
said
point.
in his heart, there is no God.
Right.
I've always interpreted that, whether it's true or not, to say that
Well,
a fool hasn't said in his mind that there's no God. A
Yeah.
fool has said in his heart. So, in other words, your heart is the one that convinces you that there's God, right? So you'd be foolish to say in your heart that there's no God,
yeah.
because there's really no doubt
Yeah.
in your heart.
Well, or that Jesus is God. You're right. And in the sense that we shouldn't become like, well, this is the truth. Because that blind certainty or that blind can lead to fanaticism.
Yeah,
It can lead to
and it's not true.
and it's not true. And I forgot who said it or where I heard it, but like a lot of times fanaticism comes from like
fear.
from fear and like
From not actually believing it yourself.
I'm right.
So you need
And
to
I'm-
force other people to believe it.
Precisely, thank
Right.
you for speaking for me. But you said it better actually than I was.
No,
No, but
I was just acting out what you were gesticulating in
I was gesticulating a lot. That's a funny word.
because it kind of has the word tickle in it. Gesticulate. Oh boy.
It's good.
No, I think for me, and I don't know if you agree, but for me, the crux of it is that I cannot know the truth in this ultimate sense unless I'm in communion with the truth.
Yeah.
And I cannot be in communion with the truth unless the truth has revealed himself to me.
Yes.
Right? So it's out in many
agree.
ways it's out of my control ultimately. I mean, there are certain things you can do to predispose yourself, unquestionably.
Yeah.
Humbling myself, opening myself up to God, love of God, all those things. But there is a sense that I will not know the truth unless I am in communion with the truth.
Yeah.
And that I cannot be in communion with the truth unless God has made himself present to me in my midst, in the depths of who I am.
And is it bold to say that he will?
That he will, that he wants to, right? He's waiting for that to happen, and that the whole point of life is, so yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean
The
that's
whole point of life.
Yeah, I mean
You're answering a question that is plaguing thousands of millennials.
the whole point of life, according to Father Michael Tischel.
No, it's not according to Father
No.
Michael Tischel. What's the whole point of life?
Communion with God.
Yeah.
Because
Why is the communion with God? What is God? In the sense of
is the foundation, is the source of everything.
Yeah.
Is the creator of everything, is the source of it all, and I've been created for this with this craving to be in communion with God, and everything else, every other pursuit, is ultimately a restless attempt to come into contact with the source of it all, kind of like to use St. Augustine's sort of concept in the beginning of his Confessions is, you have created us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it comes to rest in you. But the thing that I didn't realize until recently, I was leading a discussion on this, it kind of came to us in this discussion, is that our heart is restless until it rests in you, but it's not always up to us whether we get to rest in God or not. Mm-hmm. In other words, there are certain things we can do, right? But there is this sense that I'm restlessly sort of waiting for God to reveal himself to me too.
Yeah.
And it's not just like if I do X, Y, and Z, then I can kind of conjure up God's, in some sort of mechanistic.
Harkens back to what we said before
about the pagans.
The pagans. Yeah.
But rather, there is an element of patience and of endurance and of waiting. And that is it. I think it's the cleaners.
Are they coming in?
I think so.
So, in conclusion, if we actually found a conclusion. No, I think we did.
Yeah. No, I mean, in conclusion, I think the art of living, because it is an art, right? Is just shutting up and not talking too much. The art of living.
58 minutes.
We're sunk. The art of living is waiting for the sun to rise. And recognizing that as bright as the thousands of stars may be in the sky, and as alluring as they may be, nothing is as bright and as alluring and as singular as the sun. And just letting ourselves have a tiny seed of expectation beyond the brightness of the stars to say that maybe there's something brighter than all of these stars, and that something is not many things but is one.
Yep. That's beautiful. And I think with that, we can conclude.
Yay!
You're not supposed to be
Crowds
happy.
go wild.
I'm tired of you listening to us. I think we can conclude today's podcast. People need to come into this room and clean it.
Yep.
And so
We should let them.
we should let them do their job. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Follow us on all our social media. And I'm not going to say them all. And God bless.
Amen.